Welcome back to Cybernat Resources. Today we're going to be designing a practice piece for a CNC machine. A little background on this. I just got done disassembling my DIY CNC machine that I've had for years and made adjustments to it, expanded the size on the y-axis so that I could cut a little longer pieces. Reassembled it, replaced some parts, the typical maintenance, and put it all back together, calibrated it, and now I'm ready to actually do a test cut. And I don't want to use expensive material, and I want to make sure everything's set up right. So what I thought I'd do is just design in xDesign just a small piece made out of a 2x4 that we could cut as a practice piece. So let's get started with that. So once I start xDesign, I want to go in and I want to create a new design, and I'm going to name it, let's just name it practice piece. And it's going to save it into my common space on the platform. Alright, so once I'm there, now I'm in my new file, I want to do a top-down approach. So I'm going to click on the Z-axis. I'm going to tell it to open up or create a sketch. And now I'm ready to start designing. So first thing I want to do is just go down to my sketch tools, and let's just draw a rectangle. Start at our origin, draw any size box. Now obviously I want to draw this so it's not going to take a lot of material, and it needs to fit on the table on my CNC machine. So again, this is just for practice. So let's set our dimensions at, let's make it 12 inches long. And we're using a 2x4. So a 2x4 is not actually 2 inches by 4 inches. The 4 inches is actually 3 5/8. So let's set that width, and then let's go down to features, and let's extrude this. And just like 4 inches isn't 4 inches, 2 inches isn't 2 inches. It's 1 5/8. So we'll set our depth on our extrude at 1.625. Extrude it, and there's our solid block. Wow, we drew a 2x4 inside of xDesign. Isn't that amazing? Well, for this project, it'll work. But I just don't want it to cut a 2x4. I want it to do some other things too to make sure that all my settings inside of my software on my CNC are correct, and that the machine is cutting correctly and accurately. So let's go in here to on down into features on the tools, and let's put a fillet on our piece of wood. And when we hit fillet, it pops up and asks us if we want it to be full round or constant. We're going to use constant. So let's select that face, because that's going to be our top face. And we'll set the fillet for 1/4 inch. Click. Okay. And as you can see, we now have a 1/4 inch fillet. But let's go a little further. On this, let's put some holes in the center just to see what we're doing here. So let's go and square everything up so we can see what we are doing. Go back to sketch, select the circle tool, tell it which plane we want, and let's just draw some circles. Okay. And now we need to extrude cut that circle, and let's do, let's see, let's extrude that. We're dealing with 1 5/8 thick material. Let's extrude cut that hole. Let's not go all the way through, let's just go down 1 inch. Cut that. Now we've done a hole. It does not go all the way through, it only goes down 1 inch. That'll give us some test of our Z our z-axis on our CNC machine. I can, after we're done cutting this, I can go in with my calipers and measure that, make sure that the setting is correct. So let's go again with another circle. Select my face, and let's do a hole this time offset from the center. And you can make these any size you want. And let's extrude cut that one, and let's go all the way through on that. So our thickness is 1.625, so we'll set it for 1.625. You could also go up here and select through all one way, both geometry, next, body, whichever one you want to use, but I'm just going to let it be a blind because I know that's what the thickness is. Cuts it through, and you can see now that that hole goes all the way through. But in addition to that, let's go back and also put a fillet on the top plane of our circle. To do that, click on your circle, hold down the Control key, and click your other circle. That highlights both of them. Come down to your fillet tool, and notice how both those circles now have been selected in your items to fillet. Again, we're going to set them at 1/4 inch. Constant, click it, and there they are. So that's going to give us a basic piece to put on the CNC machine to test the accuracy of the calibration that was done on X, Y, and Z axes. So I want to save that. So let's come down here and tell it to export. Oh, I haven't saved it, so it's telling me to save it. Good thing to do is save it often, especially when you're dealing with software out on the internet, as any software. So where do I want to save it? I want to save it as a file on disk. You can change the name here if you want to. I'm going to leave it as practice piece. In my file format, I always save my files in 3 different formats. I save it the first time in the standard 3dXML file, which is standard xDesign. I'm going to click export. It goes out there and does all the calculations, does all the math. Pops up, says, where do you want to save this? Well, I have a folder called CNC table that I've been saving my files to, so I'm going to save it there. So there we go. Click save, and boom, it's saved. Now I also want to save this. I'm going to click export again. When it comes up, I'm going to use the same name, file on disk, but I'm going to change my format to SLD XML. They're your choices, but SLD XML is a SolidWorks file, so that if I need to, for some reason my internet's down and I just got to have this changed right now, I could pull up my version of SolidWorks that's on my hard drive and make the changes. So I'm going to save it as a SolidWorks file. I'm going to put it in the same folder with the same name, different file type, so it's not going to overwrite the previous one. And then, in order to pull this file up into my slicer software so I can convert it to G-code, I'm going to want to save this as an STL. Now, some of you out there are saying, "Hey, you can do that from SolidWorks." Yes, you can. Yes, you can. But not every slicer software, either for 3D printer or for CNC, accepts every file out there. So I always save it into 3 different formats so that depending on what software I'm using, one of those 3 formats is going to work where I can pull it up. So save as an STL file. I'm going to use the same name, this time as an STL, and boom, I have it saved as all 3. I've saved it as an xDesign file, I've saved it as a SolidWorks file, which those are interchangeable. and as an STL file, which I can also pull up in either xDesign or SolidWorks. All right, so that brings us to a closure of designing this small piece for CNC. And if you've got, you could use the same piece for a 3D printer. You could enlarge it, you could make it smaller. If you wanted to do some scaling and practice using the scale function, both in xDesign, in SolidWorks, or in your slicer software, you can do that. Again, I highly suggest that before you try to 3D print or CNC anything, especially when you've made changes to your machine, you always do a practice piece. It's always good, the more knowledge you can gain, and every machine has its own little nuances, whether it's a 3D printer, whether it's a CNC machine, and every software has its own little nuances depending on what you're using for, CAD design and or for your slicer software. So that brings us to the end of this session. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, subscribe to the channel, click like, and we will see you next time.